right, we'll start again, and I'm sorry I was so long-winded. If I had taken Senator Forrester's advice, we probably could have had everyone signed before it started raining. So I'm going to call Senator Rick Santorum up to say a few words, and if he would like to, I would appreciate him signing the pledge. Would you like to sign it first, Senator?
Let's do that. Let's do that right.
We've got two copies.
Tom, and I want to echo Ovid's commendation for you and American for Prosperity for the good work you're doing up here in New Hampshire and frankly across this country, and reminding conservatives, I underscore that, reminding conservatives what we stand for and who we are and why it's necessary for conservative governance to come back into Washington, D.C. I want to thank Senator Forrester for her comments and for the great work she does for the people of New Hampshire at the State House. And I want to thank all of you for coming out here on what was, until a few minutes ago, a beautiful Sunday afternoon here in New Hampshire. But it's great to be here. It's great to be back. We just spent the last 3.5 weeks in Iowa and worked very, very hard to get a message out. And the message is consistent with the themes of the pledge that I just signed. I've been called the super pledger in this race, that I've signed more pledges than any other candidate. And the reason is because, as I said from the very beginning, I'm the authentic conservative in this race, and if they're conservative organizations putting forth pledges, more likely than not I'm going to sign them, because I have a track record of actually being a conservative across the board on economic issues, on fiscal issues, on moral cultural issues, and on national security issues. No one can match the record I have of being a consistent Reagan conservative over the course of 16 years. And I can say with confidence that when I sign this pledge, I'll keep this pledge. If past performance is a record, is something to look for as far as future performance, I've signed many pledges in my time in 4 years in the House and 12 in the United States Senate. And I've never broken a one. Never once. If I say I'm going to do something, I stand up and I fight for it. And here's the difference. I win. We've been able to be successful in reforming government and shrinking government. How many folks can stand before you as a candidate for president who says they were successful in Washington, leading the charge to shrink the size of government? I did. I was the fiscal hawk when I was in the United States Senate. Several instances. Number one, welfare reform. I was the author of the Senate Welfare Reform Bill, was the author of the House bill before we took the control of the majority in 1994. I served on the Ways and Means Committee, authored the bill, and then went toe-to-toe with Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Ted Kennedy, the two lions of the left, and we beat them. We got almost half the Democrats in the United States Senate, as well as President Clinton, to sign a bill that ended the federal entitlement to welfare and did two other things that required work and put a time limit on welfare. And then we gave broad discretion to the states to manage the program. Exactly the kind of things we're going to need to do on Medicaid, on food stamps, on housing, on education, which is to end these federal programs that justifiably belong in the states, give them back to the states, and let them run those programs and get the federal government's fingers out of that pie. I've done it, consistent with this pledge. I've done it. I've also been a tough guy on spending. When I was in the United States Senate, I used to go every time we had appropriations bills, and I would bring a chart up. It was called the spendometer. And I would every time the Democrats would offer an amendment to add spending, I would add money to the spendometer. And they used to get really mad at me. And I'd say, I am going to hold you accountable for how big you want to grow this government. And they would say, oh, it's not fair, you're double counting. I said, just adding up what you said you want to put onto this budget. And so I was holding them accountable. I remember I got hammered once because we had a president who refused to put forward budgets. His name was Bill Clinton. And they put up a sign that said, "Where's Bill?" on the floor of the United States Senate. I got a lot of trouble for that, but I was echoing Ted Kennedy, who used to say, "Where's George?" when he was complaining about George Bush. I stood tall and I fought, and we were successful in holding the line on budgets and, more importantly, reforming entitlements. So I've got a track record, not just someone who can check the boxes, pledges. I'm not only taking pledges, I've taken arrows to make sure that we've reduced the size and scale of government. I've taken arrows on the issues that are important to the foundation of this country, which is the family and the community, and making sure that we get decisions back into the hands of communities and families. So I just want to thank you for coming out here today. If you're looking for someone who's been consistent, authentic, and reliable when it comes to going to Washington, D.C. and fighting and winning, no one else in this race has that record, period. Nobody. You have folks who stand up and say, "I pledge, I pledge, I pledge," or even in some cases they say, "Well, I did this in my state." Let me assure you that Washington, D.C. is nothing like the state capitals around this country. I think some of the presidential candidates now are trying to get a sense of how the media and the whole atmosphere on the national stage is a lot different than what it's like in their state, what they can, quote, get away with in their states. Washington is the big time, it's the big theater. And people say, "Well, you don't have the executive experience that some governors have." I have the experience where it matters. I have an experience working with all of the divisive interests that are in Washington, D.C. and under the microscope that the national media will burn into you like sun through that microscope. That is the experience that's really necessary. On top of that, the national security experience, what again, nobody else in this race has, having served 8 years on the Armed Services Committee, having worked on major foreign policy legislation dealing with two countries that are sort of important. One, Syria. The only piece of legislation that dealt with Syria I was the author of, the Syrian Accountability Act, and one, Iran. So if you want someone who has some expertise, some track record of confronting and successfully confronting these regimes, I'm someone in this race who has done so. So I'm here excited. We had a great 3.5 weeks in Iowa with the family, and we came out in strong position. The three folks who finished above me in the straw poll in Ames all spent in excess of $1 million. We spent less than $100,000. And we came within a stone's throw of third place. Why? Because we went out across Iowa, 68 counties. I know you don't have 68 counties in New Hampshire, thank God, but we went to 68 counties, and Joe here from NBC will attest to that because she followed me through most of them. And we talked to people, and we gave them the opportunity to talk to me, kick the tires, find out what I'm made of, whether what I'm saying is what I believe, and whether I've been able to follow through in what I say that I want to do. Also, the electoral victories. It's important to have someone who can go to a state like Pennsylvania and Ohio, which is my backyard, and do well and be competitive in a state that is necessary for us. We win Pennsylvania, folks, we elect a Republican to president, period. If Pennsylvania goes Republican, we win. Well, the most recent poll that's out in Pennsylvania has Barack Obama and me tied in Pennsylvania. So go back and look at the record of accomplishment in Washington, the record of accomplishment in a state of Pennsylvania that has over 1 million more registered Democrats and Republicans, and I won 2 elections there. 2 elections against the best the Democrats had to throw at me, including I ran an election against the team of Carville and Begala when I won and defeated a Democratic incumbent. So we have the track record electorally, we have the track record in Washington, and I hope you can tell we got the fire in the belly to ignore what the national media. If I was someone who cared about what the national media said about me, I wouldn't be here, because they don't say anything about it. Gary can relate to that. But they tend to ignore certain candidates, and they tend to have their favorites. When I was in Washington, I didn't care what the Washington Post said. I didn't care what any of the news media said. I was doing what I thought was in the best interest of our country, and that was good enough for me. And so if you want someone who's going to pay attention to what's right for the country, what the people in New Hampshire and Iowa and other states around this country are thinking, not what the elites in Washington are thinking, then you have a pretty good case in point that I'm ignoring what the popular wisdom is. I'm ignoring what the folks in Washington say who our candidate should be. And I'm going out and fighting for what I believe is the right thing for the American public, from what I hear from the people of New Hampshire and Iowa and South Carolina as I travel. So if you want to give someone an opportunity to shake up Washington and have someone who's a strong, consistent conservative be your voice in this Republican nomination, I would appreciate your support. Thanks, Tom.
Senator, take a couple questions maybe?
I'm happy to.
Maybe just two quick questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This country supposedly believes in separation of church and state, and yet several of your competitors have strongly mixed their religious views with politics. What are your feelings about that, the teaching of evolution in public schools and so on?
Separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. Those words do not appear. The words free exercise of religion do appear in the Constitution. Our founders never intended for religion not to be anything but actively involved in the public debate. In fact, Madison called it the perfect remedy. What the First Amendment allows is for people of no faith and people of faith and a variety of different faiths all to come into the public square, all to have their voices being heard, robustly argued, and then let the public decide after that debate what the course of our country is. What separation of church and state from those words are meant really come in many respects from the letter of Thomas Jefferson to the Danbury Baptists in Connecticut. And he said very clearly, separation of church and state meant government should not be involved in religion. He did not say religion should not be involved in government. In fact, he, as well as all the founders, argued just the opposite. That it's absolutely essential, as John Adams said. Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the governments of any other. Why? Because our rights, who do they come from? Where do our rights come from? Unless we don't believe this anymore, read the Declaration of Independence, which is our founding document.
What are your personal views?
My personal views is that I am someone who brings my faith and my reason into the public square. And I have views that are supported by both faith and reason. So for example, if you want to take a controversial view, abortion. My faith teaches me that abortion is murder. But reason dictates to me that taking the life of an innocent child who is both alive and genetically human is in fact taking a human life, and therefore should be by reason protected as a person under the Constitution. So I think it is incumbent upon everybody in public life to lay out why they believe what they believe, both from the standpoint if it's driven by faith and faith alone, or driven by reason and reason alone. Everybody comes to the parade, if you will, comes to the party with a conscience formed by something. Most Americans, the vast majority of Americans, have that conscience formed by their faith. And that is a legitimate thing to bring into the public square. That faith as a guide is critical. I go back to our founding document. We are endowed by our Creator with rights. And those rights were given to us. That God just said, well, here are your rights, do whatever you want with them. No. No, God gave and our founders recognized this. There is a moral law, a natural law, nature and nature's God, again, in the Declaration. Nature and nature's God, by which we are accountable to. And I always say that everybody focuses on the Constitution. It says, the Constitution is what we live our country by. The Constitution, without the Declaration, ladies and gentlemen, is France in the Revolution. They had a constitution very similar to ours, but they didn't have God. They had a secular revolution, and it turned into tyranny. If there is no moral law, and all there is the rights of the majority to impose their will, you will have tyranny. And you will end up like France did and like France is today. Our country is different. We do have a higher law, and that law is one that is essential for America to hold together if we are going to be a country.
How do you feel about the teaching of evolution in public schools?
My feeling is that evolution is a scientific theory which has holes in it. I don't think it explains how we came from nothing to where we are today. It doesn't. I don't think anybody can make a credible claim that it does. Is there evidence of evolution in nature? Yes. Does it answer all the questions? No, it does not. And so my feeling is that, and I've actually authored an amendment that said this in the United States Senate, which is the controversy around evolution should be taught, the holes as well as the evidence should be taught if we're going to be honest in the classroom about science.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Senator.